Right. I was born on the 4th of May 1939 at St James's Hospital in Balham. I was a little premature, around about £5 I think, and my mother wasn't terribly well, so she was sent to Barton-on-Sea to recuperate, which I presume is how she got to know the area. The parents then moved down here sometime before September 1939 when the Second World War started. Don't remember a lot about my dad at that time. I know he had been in the Navy, but apparently he came out for medical reasons. I had one brother who was 7 years older than me and two sisters. Pat was 11 years older than I was, and Phyllis was 15 years older than I was. So I never knew Phyllis very much. I don't ever remember her being home. And I don't remember Pat being home an awful lot of the time, although I remember her doing drawings. She loved drawing, and she used to draw Snow White and so on. And we moved to Oakdale, 143 Dorchester Road, which is also called Hillcrest. So I presume we were fairly comfortably with money. I remember as a toddler being dressed in leggings and a little jacket and a little bonnet, and I can remember being taken to hospital because I apparently had something wrong with my legs, sores or something. And I loved the smell in the hospital. And I can remember them putting gentian violet all over my legs and then bandaging them up, which is why I wore leggings, I suppose. So I suppose that's why I always liked hospitals. That's, I suppose, my real first memory. I can also remember my eldest sister getting married. I was a bridesmaid and I had a terrible pouty face, I remember. And the one thing I really stuck in my mind was the wedding cake, because in the war sugar was rationed, so you couldn't have sugar, and they used white rice paper to cover the cake. So I remember that. I suppose I must have been about 4 then. I can remember sitting on the doorstep looking at books on the front doorstep and having my photo taken there. I can remember my mother knitting me a little sunsuit for when we went out in the garden, because the house, it was a nice house, still there obviously, although it's altered very much around it because they've now made a little road by the side and there are houses behind now, which there wasn't. And we had a bathroom, we had electricity, we had a reception room on one side and we had the living room on the other. Behind was the kitchen, and there was a little bedroom down the little passage, and I think there were 2 bedrooms upstairs, but I'm not sure. And out the back was a veranda. And my mother, during the war, when there was an air raid, she used to go out on the veranda and watch all the planes go over. And I can only remember Brian and I being at home, and we both used to have to go under the Anderson shelter, which was in the bedroom that was downstairs. It seemed to be quite fun. We had a nice big garden at the back with raspberry canes. My brother had a rabbit, which used to get out quite a lot, and my mother got really fed up with it because she was always having to get under the garage sort of thing to get it out. And I think one day she did for it, and I think we had him for dinner. I can remember my gran being bombed out, and Gran and Grandad, it was Gran's second husband, Grandad Wright, because my mother was a Langridge, not a Wright. And I can remember them coming down at some point and staying with us because they'd been bombed out. They lived in Sidcup in Kent, so of course they used to get a lot of air raids there. And Gran and Mum, they both used to work down the hospital. Gran used to go down there during the day and Mum at night. And I can remember my granddad sitting me on his knee and reading to me. I think that's where I got my love of books and my imagination, where I, used to think all sorts of things. I don't know how long they were with us. And I can remember my dad coming home, and we had a car, and he used to go out and he used to show films around the villages and to the army camps, Air Force camps and that, American and English. And when Mum used to go shopping, he would put a big great white tablecloth on the wall and he would show films there to make sure they were all right. And some of them were noisy. Mum used to get annoyed sometimes because she'd come home and she'd say, I can hear it all down the road. I can remember when we got a dog, we had when I was about 5, we had a half-cross Labrador, black Labrador, called Bonzo. And I can remember Brian taking me on his bike. I'd sit on the handlebars and we'd go up to the top of Dorchester Road there and get the dog food and that, and we'd eat the dog biscuits on the way back. I can also remember him taking me down the pool park, which was full of bamboo in those days, and we used to play hide and seek and things in the bamboo. So Oakdale was my first school as well. My other gran, my dad's mum, I only ever remember seeing her once when we were taken to London, and she was, to me, just an old lady in like a long taffeta dress sat in the corner, and that's all I can remember of her. So I didn't know that gran very well. After the war, because obviously Gran and Grandad went back after maybe a year, I don't know how long, because they had Nissen huts and that they built for the people who were bombed out, so they went back there to live in Sidcup. And then after the war, Dad thought he would start a taxi business, and Brian and I had to had to paint the taxi sign, which I found very difficult because black, when you're trying to paint black, it's never really black. It's sort of a dark grey, so you had to keep going over it. I can remember that happening, and I can remember having whooping cough because I had to sleep in the downstairs room. That wasn't very nice, having whooping cough. And I can also remember Phil Berry coming down then to help Dad with the taxi business. So he was Mum's second cousin, so he was already known to the family. Apparently, I didn't know until later, but he'd left his wife. And things changed then when I was 7. One summer's day, Mum said, we're going on holiday. And we went off quite happily, just she and I. And we went to Flimwell, which is quite near to Tunbridge Wells. I thought it was in Kent because it was near Hawkhurst, but on the postal address now it's called East Sussex. And we went to my aunt's farm, my mum's sister Gladys. We went to the farm where they lived, and I thought it was a long holiday because at Christmas we were still there. I can remember when we first went, beginning of September, all these people coming down on the train and camping in the fields, and it was a hop farm, picked hops. So we were there for a while, and then we went to Grand's and stayed in the Nissen hut, and it was a very cold winter, very, very cold, and all the icicles were hanging from the windows, and it was quite fun. And then we went back to Flimwell because the cottage that belonged to the farm had become empty, and we went to live there, and Mum worked on the farm. She worked in the hop fields in the spring. She helped to string up the vines and so on. And every summer people would come down from London to pick the hops. And I was never allowed to play until I'd picked a bushel of hops. A bushel is a great big basket full. And then at some point, Phil arrived. He didn't live in with us, he lived over the road. And over the road, the lady who took him in, she had kennels. She bred Springer Spaniels, and she showed them. And that's another great memory for me, because I used to go over and I used to help her with them, and she showed me how to hold them and everything, walk them. And one day she took me to Canterbury where she was showing, and I had the child's show as well. So I had to take the dog round and make him do it and hold him the correct way and everything, which was a lovely memory. I went to school at Ticehurst, which I loved. And at Ticehurst, you were always moved up classes according to your ability. And I think my greatest memory there was with one of the teachers who did From a Railway Carriage by Robert Louis Stevenson, which probably gave my love of literature. And we stayed there for some time. My Aunt Gladys died while we were there. She just had a baby, and she really had given up because her husband didn't treat her very well. And Phyllis, my sister, who had been in the Land Army in the war, she had married the farmer, and she said to Mum that in the village another farmer had a cottage to let. If Mum wanted to go and be near her, then move. What she didn't realise was that Phil was going to come with us, because he and Mum were an item. So we moved to Websley. I was just before my 10th birthday, that was. And we went to this strange place. There were only 3 cottages there. We were a cottage on our own. We had the sort of cart shed at the side. There was no electricity. There was cold water. There was a big boiler in the kitchen, a big brick-built boiler, so you had to light that for wash day and for when you had baths. There was a kitchen range. All the cooking had to be done on that. So oil lamps, obviously. There were only 2 bedrooms, and there was a woodshed behind the house, joined to the house. The toilet was outside, obviously a bucket. And the other side there was the pigsty with all the pigs in it. There was stables on one side with 2 cart horses, and a little way down the passage there was where they had the calves. So that was quite nice. The only thing was I had a mile to walk before I could get to school. I had a year at the village school, became head girl. The year that I finished that school, Frankie, my nephew, Phyllis's eldest child, he started school there. So he'd be running around the playground at playtime saying, "Auntie Margaret, Auntie Margaret." We had a very nice headmistress there. Friday afternoons we used to go out in the garden and do the weeding and so on. It was a Church of England school, right next to the church. Some nice village traditions. At Christmas we'd go round singing around the village. Here we go, wassailing and so on. We used to do nativity plays for the parents. I was Mary, and Brian Adlam, who Chrissy asked you about, he was Joseph. Yeah, because he was head boy when I was head girl. So some quite nice memories there. Used to have to walk down to the dairy every day to get the milk. Hard journey back up the hill. Lord Portman lived in Knighton House. Obviously that's now a private school, part of Bryanston School. The groom, if I was walking to school sometimes and he came along with the horses, he would give me a ride on the horse to get down to the village. I was ahead of the children in my class at the village school because the education in Kent had been very good. I used to read 4 library books a week. I used to have 2 for me and 2 I said were for Mum, but I still read them. And then when I was 11, I passed 11 plus and went into Blandford to the grammar school. At some point when I was about 13, Mum went up to Berkshire because Gran was ill. Grandad had already died. Grandad had just died, and she brought Gran back, and Gran then came to live with us. So I had to share a bedroom with Gran then, because there were only 2 bedrooms, but it was a big room. There was a double bed in there and a single bed, and there was a little alcove where we used to store apples and things like that. I was always in the top 3 at school, so that was all competitive, and I loved it, and I loved the English and the language. And we had a an English teacher called Mr. Watkins. He was small, he was Welsh, he had horrible teeth, but when we did 12th night, he played Malvolio, and I always remember him, and I always liked him because he used to play Malvolio so well. As a kiddie, I was always writing or reading. I wrote plays. I didn't write stories, I wrote plays with the characters doing different things and so on, and I loved doing that. When I was about 14, Phil and Mum got married. I didn't get on well with Phil. He was very, very strict. He'd been in the Metropolitan Police Force for 27 years. He was very Victorian. 8 o'clock every night, no matter what. Even up till I was 16, I had to wash and go to bed. Didn't get pocket money. I had to, every Saturday, I had to chop a faggot of wood, and I had to split the logs for the fire. I suppose when I was about 14 as well, we got electricity, which did help. We had a part of the garden, a part of the farmer's field for the garden, where he used to grow all the vegetables and everything. And in the summer, every fortnight, he would have a barrel of cider, which he did allow me to have some cider at the weekend. He used to save all his coppers up. He never used to spend any coppers, pennies, tuppences, and so on. He'd put them on the mantelpiece, and then every so often he would say, "Here's your pocket money." And I would have all those coppers. When it came to go on holiday, we didn't go away on holiday, but when Brian got married, when I was 14, I went up to London initially because he was at Kneller Hall at the School of Music there, because Brian was in the 1st Dorsets Army Band, and he did a year at Kneller Hall. So they put me on the train to go up to Waterloo. He met me at Waterloo, took me to his lodgings, and while we were there, they did a grand concert. So his landlady took me to the concert because Brian was playing, and I remember it being the 1815 overture with all the good trumpets going and the fireworks going, and I really loved that. He had lodgings in Twickenham, and then we went to Yorkshire, to Knaresborough, where he got married to Jean, and I actually stayed there a fortnight on holiday. We arrived at 2 o'clock in the morning, and there was a house full of girls, and they made breakfast breakfast at that time in the morning, brunetted anyway. And I remember them washing my hair and rinsing it in vinegar. I was a bridesmaid, obviously, and we had sweet peas, which I loved. The other thing I was going to say about my stepfather, about Phil, when I went on holiday, he said, "How much have you saved?" And when I told him, he doubled it. So taught me to, be a bit careful with money. So when I was 16, and I did my O-levels, I passed 8 very well. In fact, I'm going to give you the book, aren't I, that I got for my O-level. And Gran had just died in December, just before Christmas, when I was 15, just before I was 16. I came home from the Christmas party and she had died. So I couldn't sleep at home that night, I remember. But I had a history mistress at school, and she knew I was looking to leave home because Phil and I didn't get on at all. In fact, once I had a real row with him because it was, eat your dinner, if you don't eat that, you don't want any pudding, and that sort of thing. And I can't quite remember what it was about. There was something, and I said, "I don't you dare," or something, and he was nasty to me, and I went for him across the table, and he was going to leave. My mother begged me to say I was sorry to him. I said, "No, we can do without him. We don't want him." But anyway, she did persuade me to say sorry to him. But he was good in other ways. He was never wanted for clothes or food or anything like that, and we played cricket, and we went out and watched cricket and did various things. But I wanted to get away from home. And the history mistress, she was friendly with the matron of a home in Bexhill, where I had an aunt living there anyway. And she gave me the address of the matron, said, write to her. And I wrote to her and asked her if there was a position. And I got an answer back, yes, I could go up there and do a year or two, whichever I wanted, for work. So they took me up because by this time they had a car. Grandad had a car. So they took me up there, 16 years old. That was in the September. And I arrived. It was a home that had incurably ill children like spina bifida, muscular dystrophy, hydrocephalus, and that sort of thing. And it also took in convalescing children from the East End of London. So it was quite a mixed bag. And got there, felt very strange, but I settled in quite well. The first month I was there, I think I only had a couple of pound, but the rate that I got was about £5 every month. But of course you had your keep and so on. And it was very good grounding. We had one trained staff nurse, there was matron, and matron's niece, who was partway through her training and had come back to help her aunt. And we had a sister, a nun. I think she was a Franciscan, but I'm not sure. And the rest of us were all sort of 16 to 18 who were there. Very good grounding. Matron used to give us a lecture every week. First it was on ward management, and then about the bones and different things. And we were given a lot of responsibility. We were taught how to give diabetic injections, to give the insulin, and the hydrocephalus, how to do the valve and everything of those who got that. We had one little babe who was blind and deaf, and he had to be fed by tube because he couldn't do anything. And we learned how to put the Riles tube down and test that it wasn't in the lungs, that it was in the stomach. So we were given a lot of responsibility. We had to, obviously, Monday night we used to call knit night, because the East End children coming down, you didn't know what it was going to be like, so you had to go through their heads with a knit comb and treat them if they had knits and so on. The baths we used to have to clean, and we cleaned them with paraffin, which I'd never heard of before, cleaning them with paraffin, so that was quite a thing to do. And we had to go on night duty. And one of the sisters left, and I was actually in charge on night duty when I was, just before I was 17. But we had the nun slept there, so if we had any real emergency or anything go wrong, we could go and wake her. So we also learned how to write reports, because we had to write what happened during the night, how the kids had slept and all this sort of thing. And we had children who had bedwetting, and you used to have to get them up in the night and take them to the loo and so on. And you also had to do their breakfast in the morning. So I spent a year there. Had a few boyfriends. The one I was seeing before I left there, I was very keen on. He was in the army though, he was stationed at Barn Stacey, but he used to come home. And his mum used to clean at the nursing home. She had 5 boys. We used to go to the Delaware Pavilion and do dancing and so on. On my days off, I used to go to my aunt's. That was the wife, well, Uncle George and Auntie Kath. Uncle George was Mum's brother, one of Mum's brothers, because she had quite a few brothers. And I used to go there, and Constance was about a year younger than me. She's still living. She still lives in the house in Sidley. And that was a really nice year. I really enjoyed that first year afterwards. Debated which hospital to apply to. I thought about going to London, to the North Middlesex, but eventually I applied to Poole, and I came back home, and I went to Poole Hospital at 17 as a pre-student, by which time Mum and Phil had moved down to the village into the thatched cottage, which perhaps you can remember. Yeah? Is that enough for today?
That's great.
Okay, so you want to know about when I went to grammar school, obviously at the age of 11. I was in the A stream because it was streamed A and B. I was in the A stream, which meant that I learned Latin. So I used to get up about 7 o'clock, I suppose, in the morning, wash, get ready, and I had to walk a mile down to the dairy from Websley, where the school bus picked me up and took me into school at Blandford, which was on the corner of Damery Street and I think it's Salisbury Street. By the Badger it is. It's now flats because the secondary modern school that replaced the grammar school is out of town a bit. So we used to get to school, obviously assembly, into school. Typically we had books given to us, our textbooks. We had desks that we would put everything in. We did the maths. I was okay at maths. I loved algebra. I hated geometry, but I was okay at maths. English was my favourite subject, obviously. Then we learned French, which I'd already started learning a little bit because I was very keen to learn French. Pat had given me a self-educating encyclopedia, and I'd started picking it up from there when I was still at primary school with the help of one of the teachers. So that was fun, French. We had a lady called Miss Phillips, and she learned German, so so often she would swear at us in German, and she would also say the word merde in French, which I presume you know what that means. We would do Shakespeare. I liked Shakespeare. We had an English teacher called Mr. Watkins. He was Welsh. He was quite small, round face, and he had terrible teeth. But when we did Twelfth Night, and he played the part of Malvolio, he really made that play for me. He was great. I loved English. So after 2 years at grammar school, I had to drop domestic science and to drop geography. That's right, because they put me into the group that did not general science, but we did physics, biology, and chemistry separate. So that made quite a difference. Didn't do very well at chemistry. I liked physics and I liked biology. Every year I was competing with a girl called Penelope McKillop and another little girl called Joy. I can't remember what her surname was. And we were always competing for the top place. Every year I was at grammar school, I got a prize for being in the top 3. Usually I was in the top 3 for Latin and French as well. When it came to the O-levels, I got 8 out of my 9 O-levels, and all with good marks. And on the English language, I only lost 11 marks. I had 89%, I remember. If things had been different at home, I would probably have stayed on at grammar school, but I wanted to leave home. And without my mother knowing, in my last year at grammar school, with the help of my history teacher, Miss Hart, I wrote to a children's home in Bexhill and asked for a job there. And I got the job there. And I think I've described that before, how we worked, all the responsibility we had, learned to give diabetic injections, put a Riles tube down a baby, did head search for nits and so on. So I learned a lot there, and had some fun there too, because used to go out with the girls, had a couple of boyfriends, used to go on the motorbike across the Romney Marshes, used to go to the Delaware Pavilion on a Saturday night and do a bit of dancing. So it was a good year. In fact, I had a boyfriend there, and I was devastated when I did leave there, because the woman who cleaned the nursing home, she was like another mother to me. She had 5 boys of her own. It was one of her boys was actually my boyfriend. So it was a bit of a wrench coming back home, and that's when I went to Poole Hospital as a pre-student, 17 years old. I went there in September. Don't know if I told you anything about the time at Poole Hospital.
No, that's where we got to.
Well, I went there. It was quite daunting in a way. We had the house across Parkstone Road. It's now flats there, opposite the hospital on Parkstone Road. There was a house for the pre-students. There were about 8 of us in there, I suppose. I shared a room with one other person, and we had to learn how to make the hats that you had to wear, the uniform, blue dress, white apron, and the white sort of butterfly hat. And for my first ward, I was put on maternity ward, which was over St Mary's Road. It's now Shaftesbury something or other. It was the old Langren ward then. You had the laundry over there as well, and the boiler. And I enjoyed it. The midwives were very nice and learned how to do all the various things and do the bins for sterilisation, did the care of patients and so on, and actually saw my first baby born. After about 5 months, well, 4 months probably, I was sent over to the main hospital to the maternity ward over there, which was for more serious cases, shall we say, people who had high blood pressure, who had eclampsia and so on. And I actually saw there with Mr. Buckle, who was the chief obstetrician, my first forceps delivery, which was good. And the nursery there, I was allowed to bathe the babies and everything. And I spent one of my Christmases, well, my first Christmas actually, I went over there and did some work. And then I went on to the medical ward with Sister Wyman, and I enjoyed medical ward, although you had quite a few elderly patients with heart problems and so on. I quite enjoyed that. And then I did private wards, and private wards was different again, because you went up and you saw patients on their own. You had to lay their trays up in the afternoon, you had to do their teas and lay the tray just so, and the sandwiches you made. The kitchen didn't make that for the private patients, you did that yourself. And I enjoyed that. The sister there was very good. Very different to what it is now. When you went in the mornings at 8:30, you hands behind your back, stand straight, listen to the report, and so on. And when you were working, you were often asked, what's wrong with this patient? What's the treatment? And so on. And I'd already learned to do reports when I was at Bexhill, so that wasn't a worry if I was asked to do anything like that. And then when I was 18, actually I ought to go back a little bit, didn't I? Because in the March before I was 18, one of the other nurses in my group asked me if I'd go to a St. Patrick's dance with her. I don't think I did this with you. And I said, yes, fine, I'll come. And it was a St. Patrick's dance, Patrick's Eve dance, down at the youth hall of the Roman Catholic Church. And that's where I met your dad. He came over to me while I was there, and he said, would you like a drink? And I looked at him and I thought, oh, who's this boy? I thought he was only about 14. Anyway, he bought me a drink and we talked, and he actually walked me back to the hospital, and that's how I started to see him. Then obviously in the May I was 18 and I started my proper training. Still going out with your dad. We had some good times. My friend Margot was also going out with a friend of Dad's, Bertie Matthews, and Ivor, who was one of your friends' dad. He started going out with another friend who was nursing, so we used to make a group sometimes, and they used to come back to the nursing home, and we used to have to be in at 10 o'clock in the evening. You had to be in, but otherwise the door was locked. But Dad, being very thin and skinny, he could get in because the ironing room had bars on it, but Dad could get in between the bars. So he used to get in, go round and unlock the door, and very quietly we'd let in, and we'd go in the lounge and try and keep it quiet. Although we did get caught one night, not because we were making a noise, somebody else was making a noise, but the home sister who slept in, she heard and thought it was down there, and she came out. We'd have been all right, but Margot and and Bernie, they went through the French doors out on the lawn instead of staying there and letting us all, So got into a bit of trouble over that, having boys in what they were down in the lounge room, weren't in our rooms. And then about 2 weeks before I was due to finish my PTS, the first 3 months of the training, I got Asian flu. So I was put down in private wards in isolation, a little room on my own, not allowed to see anybody or so on. And got through that all right. Came out, finished my couple of weeks in PTS, and then it was time to go on the wards. And that's when Dad decided that he was going to go to London to be with Ernie. And because Ernie was up there working, because he already had been working there years before at Sainsbury's, and he knew Pauline, and he'd gone back to London to work. And Dad decided he was going to go and join him. So I decided that I would get a job up there as well, and I got a live-in job as a nanny with a Jewish family in Edgware. So Dad was in Kenton and I was in Edgware, and we used to meet up. There was a little boy of about 3 to look after, and they had a baby 3 months old. I used to love the baby. Friday nights, because they were Jews, I couldn't be in the house. I had to go out on a Friday night because that was the night they had their Passover meal and they had their parents over and so on. And I was there for a while and then decided no, that it wasn't working out too well. So I got a job in a grocery place at Queensbury, a place called Queensbury. And I got rooms in Wealdstone, and Dad and Ernie actually worked in a grocery shop in Wealdstone. So that was great fun. And then Dad decided that he was going to come home again. I think Nanny wanted him home actually. So he came home and I applied to go to Weymouth Hospital where I was accepted. So I came back and went down to Weymouth. So I was, I don't know if I was, must have been 19 by this time. The thing I didn't say was that when we went up to London, before I got to the nanny's job, I went to stay with my Auntie Daisy, who was my dad's sister. And that was in South Harrow she lived. They had a son living at home. The daughter wasn't living at home, but the son was. And we used to have fun making apple pie bears for one another every so often. And that's when I met Dad again. He came and met me and so on. And while I was living in Wealdstone, he used to come and occasionally and see me. So that's how I got back with Dad in my life. Came back home, went down to Weymouth, started my training down there, and used to come up at weekends and stay with Auntie Pat. Then one day, it must have been about October, because down at the hospital we were just starting up. I joined the group to do drama and so on, and we were just starting to gear up to choose the pantomime we were going to play and so on. And I came home to Auntie Pat's one weekend. Dad had said he couldn't see me that weekend. He was going to be doing something. So I came and stayed with Auntie Pat. went to catch the train on the Sunday night back to Weymouth, and there on the station platform was Dad with another girl. So I didn't say anything. I got on the train. My friend who got on at Portsmouth, coming back from her weekend away, met me. She said, you're not going to contact him again. I said, no, I'm not. So a couple of weeks went by. I was just going to go out for a practice for the pantomime, and the phone rang, and somebody said, it's for you, Margaret. So I went to the phone, and it was Dad, and he said, I want to see you. I've got something to say, he said. Oh, right, I want to see you. So the next weekend I came down to Poole, and that's when he asked me to marry him. He said the other girl was just a friend and so on, and he wanted to marry him. And so that's when I actually decided that I'd have to come back to Poole and save for marriage, which was a shame in a way, because I was really getting on very, very well at Weymouth, doing all sorts, and enjoying it. So I came back to stay with Auntie Pat again. She put me up, she and Uncle Bal. And knowing that we'd need some money, and obviously nursing wasn't very well paid, and Dad didn't get a lot of money because he had to pay nanny, I got a job down at Sydney S. Birds, which was down Fleet's Lane there, where Aisha's was eventually. Aisha wasn't there then. That was all Sydney S. Birds, all that factory was then. They did all sorts of things. They made cine reels, they did soldering for closed circuit boards, and they also made organs. They had several different things. Anyway, I went into the group that was making cine reels, and first day there, chap sat me in front of a fly press, and he said, you put it in here, you pull this handle, and then you take it out, you put it in. I was doing that in half a dozen. I thought, well, this is a slow way to do it. So I was slipping it in, pull the handle, getting the other one ready, and I was, and he said, you're the quickest I've ever seen anyone pick it up like that. And we were on piecework down there. So I started to get a good rate, and I was earning well on piecework. And the inspection was getting very busy, and Iris, who was the one on there, she was thinking that she was going to have to give up very soon. So the overseer, Jeff, he said to me, how do you fancy doing inspection? I said, well, I'll give it a go. And inspection was, you put the cine reel on a jig and you ran it, and you had to see that it ran true, and if it didn't, you had to put it, you fingered it and moulded it so that it did run true. And you also did some packing of the boxes as well when you didn't have too much inspection. And I did that, and I carried it on when Iris left. And Jeff said to me, he said it's amazing. He said 2 women, he said, who've done the inspection, he said, and have done it so well. And he said, you've both had funny eyes, because obviously I've got one eye, so, and Iris had funny eyes. And yet for that, we did really well. And I was actually earning more than Dad, because my piecework rate was really good. So we started planning for the wedding, which was going to be in the August. We'd been out to Stowpane, and we'd seen the vicar and made the arrangements. And there was a lady, it was quite funny, because there was a lady I knew at work who was living in this house in Market Street, and she said the upstairs was for let. And Dad actually knew the people who were letting it, so we both, in different ways, got the same building, and we actually did get that to live at when we were first married. So our wedding, of course, was the 1st of August 1959. I was 19, although on the wedding certificate I think it says I was 20. Was I 19? No, I wasn't. I was 20, but it said I was 19. That's right. Because Nanny wouldn't let him get married. You had to be 21 in those days to get married without permission, and so Dad had to wait till he was 21 before we got married. So we got married at De Weston. Mum had a £25 premium bond win, which was quite good at that time, which helped pay for the reception. My stepfather said, "You do not invite your father, because if you invite your father, I do not come." And so, of course, that was a little bit of a thing, but had to keep Mum happy. So we got married at De Weston, and the reception was in the school hall. So I had Pat as my matron of honour. I had Auntie Susan as a bridesmaid, and I had Valerie, which was Phyllis's daughter, as a bridesmaid. Brian and Jean came down, and she was pregnant actually with David at the time, but I didn't know that. She had the 2 little girls, Jean did. So that all went off well. And we went to a place called Bishop Staton in Devon, not far from Timber, for our honeymoon. Had a nice week there, and we came back to settle down into the 2 rooms that we had down on Market Street. We had a bed sitting room, and we had a kitchen upstairs, and we shared the bathroom with the people downstairs, and we were allowed to have a bath once a week. And got on quite well. Dad was earning about £7 a week he brought home, and I was still down at Fleetsbridge, down Fleets Lane there, and as I say, I was earning good money because I was doing piecework. And before we were married, I also did a Saturday job with Auntie Pat up at Rockley, because Uncle Bob was warden up there then at Rockley. So I used to go up and get some extra money on the Saturday. And while I was up there, there was a kitten. So we actually got a little kitten just before Christmas. It must have been early December. I'd been having a bit of trouble with my stomach on and off for ages, and going to the doctor, and it wasn't right. But he didn't seem to be too worried about it. But just before Christmas, I was getting real pains, and he sent me to the hospital, and I saw Mr. Buckle, who obviously knew me because I'd worked with him a couple of years before. And because of the pain I was getting, he said, "Could you be pregnant?" I said, "Well, I don't know. I could." He said, "I think you might have an ectopic pregnancy. I'm going to keep you in." So this was the Christmas week this was. So he kept me in, did the operation, and he said there was a cyst on the womb that was bleeding, and he tied it off, but I was pregnant, so I was going to have to stay in bed, and I was going to be in hospital a couple of weeks. So about 2 days later, it was actually Christmas Day. So I spent my first Christmas Day, married Christmas Day, in hospital. Which wasn't too bad, apart from the fact that I was sick in the morning and sick in the evening, and Dad came to see me in the afternoon to have tea. and I had a terrific nosebleed. So I was in there for a few days down in the surgical ward in Poole Hospital, and then they sent me up to Alderney, which was then a convalescent as well, and I was up there for a couple of weeks, sick morning and evening. So my first 3 months expecting John wasn't good, but after that, I mean, I was fine. I felt really well, and I carried on working until I was seven months pregnant, and I was really fit. I used to walk from Poole because it wasn't too far to walk usually, and I used to walk a lot of the time from Poole to up to Fleet's Lane, and sometimes I'd walk home, sometimes I'd catch the bus, but I felt really, really, really well after the first 3 months, and I obviously had John in Poole Hospital. I was a couple of weeks overdue, and they took me in because they said we're going to have to induce you if you haven't had the baby. I'd been in and out of labour a couple of times, but I had nosebleed. And I had nosebleed when I went in there, and they took me over to the hospital and cauterised my nose, and they actually induced me, and I had John on the 27th of August, obviously. I think it was a Friday, I'm not sure. But the couple of weeks that I was in hospital, in the maternity ward, waiting for John to be born, as I knew the staff in all the midwives and that, they used to say to me, "Oh, come on, make yourself useful, go on down the nursery and feed the prems, or you do so and so," which I used to do. Dad had a shock one night because he came in and he said, "Oh, where's Margaret?" And the girl in the next bed said, "Oh, she's down the nursery feeding the twins." But they weren't mine. And I was actually in hospital with Doreen Ellis. I don't know if you remember the Ellises. Yeah, Tony. Because she had Tony at the same time as I had John. So we were actually in hospital together. And then I came out. We applied to the council for council house, saying, we only had the bed sitting room, we had the kitchen, I had a baby Burko to boil the nappies. I did have the washing line and so on. We were there a few months. They said, "Oh, you got so many points," and so on. And a few months later, Auntie Pat said that the house next to her was becoming vacant. So she said, "Come on, we'll go down the council offices together," which we did. And she said the house was becoming vacant. I was on the list. I had the baby. We were only in 2 rooms, and if possible, could I have the house next to her, which we were given, of course. So we moved up to Holborn Road in number 11. Yeah, number 11, that's right. And that's where we lived for several years then. You and, Ian was born in hospital. Again, with Ian, I had to be induced because my blood pressure went up, and they didn't want me to get eclampsia. So with Ian, I had to be induced, and he was quite a long time coming. We actually tried quite a long time for Ian, so there was about 18 months between him and John, and then you came along a lot quicker, and I had you at home, and Dad actually was there. It was quite funny because Uncle Rich and Auntie Jan, they called in on the morning that I was in labour with you, and they said, well, when are you having this baby then? I said, today. And they said, oh, you don't look as if you're in labour. I said, well, I am. And they were just off on holiday, so they went off on holiday. The midwife came at about 2:00, and she brought a pupil with her. And she said, I'll be back about 5:00. I've got clinic this afternoon. She said, you're not going to be doing anything, but I'm leaving the pupil with you. But all of a sudden, everything started happening about 3:00 in the afternoon. And Dad helped the midwife deliver you. I didn't even have time to take my dress or anything off. You were very quick. And the next day, Grandad Berry and Nanny came over to see us, and Grandad said, "You're going to call him Philip after me?" I said, "Well, no, because we've already got Philip in the family." I said, "But I'll call him Andrew." So he was quite happy with that. And so I had you 3 boys, and obviously I didn't work until a little bit later. We only had the 2 bedrooms at Hilborn. So you were all pretty good babes. The only thing with you as a baby is that you tended to get bronchitis a little bit. So you 3 boys, as you got older, obviously, when you were born, it was funny because John was just learning. No, that was when Ian was born. When Ian was born, John was just learning to walk, and he actually came up the stairs when Dad was up there with me, which was a bit of a fright. He was quite happy when you were born. He was big brother. Ian was still crawling. Ian was a lazy baby. I mean, how old was he when you were born? I'm not sure. He was over a year old, wasn't he? But he wasn't walking when you were born. He was quite a big babe. It was funny because I was feeding you one day, and he crawled out to the kitchen and he started eating the cat's food, which was kitty cat. Oh, that did smell. It did smell then. He was funny. But when you were born, Dad stayed home. He looked after me, and he always made sure there was a cup of tea when the midwife came. And that's when he made the famous dumplings. You remember that story? Yeah. He was making stew one day for dinner, and he thought these dumplings looked too small, so he made another batch and made them twice the size. And obviously, when they started cooking, they swelled, and the lid was being pushed off by the dumplings. He's never forgotten that. But he was very good like that. So life went on. John started school, and I obviously stayed home. I didn't do any work then at all until we moved when you were about 5, when you started school. And then I started to go weekends to the place in Lindsay Road, the children's place, Victoria School there. I did evenings then, and quite enjoyed that. But I did not night duty. The only thing was, used to get pretty tired because I didn't sleep very well during the day, and you kids used to be noisy sometimes. I remember, I don't know how old you were when Auntie Pat moved. Do you remember that at all? No, because Auntie Pat used to look after you sometimes when I went to pool. Because when I had the other 2, Creekmore Halt was still open, the station. And I used to be able to take the pram to Creekmore, get in the guards van and take it down. Whereas there was no station then, and taking you out to pool, anywhere like that when I went shopping was difficult. I did do it a couple of times, but carrying you was hard with the pushchair. So Auntie Pat used to look after you then. Didn't have a lot of garden to play in, but you used to go up and down on the path with your trikes and scooters and so on. And the girls next door, Linda and Susan Baker, they used to play with you sometimes. But not long after you were born in the August, Nanny and Grandad Berry came down on the Christmas, and we had a nice Christmas. The winter that year was quite hard, and then in the April after you were born, we one Saturday night we were there, and there was a knock on the door, and there was a policeman there, and he said, was my husband in? And I said yes. And I said, come in. He said, no, I won't come in. He said, well, I'd like to speak to your husband. So I sent Tom out, and was to tell him, or to let me know, the policeman wouldn't tell me himself, that Nanny had died. She died suddenly. And then obviously I went round to Auntie Pat and told her. And I think the weekend after that, I think we all went over to De Weston, to the cottage where they lived then. And I remember I had a job to find any sheets for all the beds. And I knew Mum had some because she had them all in the chest on the landing. But Phyllis had been there and taken them. But we went over there anyway. For the funeral, which was down at the chapel in De Weston. Auntie Betty looked after you boys while we went down there, and Phyllis wasn't very happy because Grandad Berry asked me to go in with him, and she said as the eldest child she should have been there, but that was one of those things. And then not that long after that, Uncle Bub, Auntie Pat's husband, became ill. He was a conductor on the buses, and he was quite a heavy smoker, and it was found he had lung cancer. So he had radiotherapy for some time, and apparently it burned him pretty well, but it wasn't making a lot of difference. And Uncle Jim, who lived at Stowpane, that's one of Mum's brothers, he said to Auntie Pat to go out there, and he'd be around to help and so on. And she went out to a council house out there, which left next door empty, and Uncle Bub died out there later that year. And Mr. and Mrs. Phillips came to next door. Do you remember them? They were from South Africa, and eventually they went back. But anyway, when you were 5, we moved to Allenby Road, and you were all going to school, and you were a little devil, because you wouldn't, when you went to school, when it was time to come home, you'd never go to the toilet before you came home. And sometimes it was a bit of a lost cause. But you three used to come home. And then when you were 7, as I said before, I suddenly found out that you couldn't read, that you'd been so helpful in school and that they'd made such use of you that some of your education had lapsed. So I spent my summer holiday teaching you to read. But apart from that, I mean, life has gone on, various things have happened. Can't say we were in Allenby when Auntie Pat got breast cancer. She had one breast removed and she seemed to be doing very well. And then later, of course, the cancer came back, and I had to get in contact with the Navy welfare because Chris was in the Navy. He was in Hong Kong somewhere out that way, and they got in touch for him to come home. Tony was going to school in Blandford because, as you know, Auntie Pat lived at Stickland. So there's somebody out Winterbourne Abbas that way, looked after Tony in the week, and then he used to come down to us at the weekends. But obviously Pat didn't survive because the cancer had spread to the stomach and everywhere. And then Uncle Jim took Tony and not Chris, obviously, because he was in the Navy there. But while Auntie Pat was in hospital, she asked me if I would see if Tony could get into the Navy. Well, he wasn't 16 then, so Dad and I took him down to Dorchester to the recruiting. And they gave him the tests, and they said, well, normally they wouldn't take him, but because my father and his father had both been in the Navy, they would take him in and take him into the Navy when he left school, which is what happened. Obviously, when you were 5, there was an advert in the paper for people with good education, with their O-levels and that. They were crying out for teachers. So I went to college up at Constitution Hill Road. There was a part of the College of Education there, and you used to have to go to Weymouth to the College of Education there once a week. So I did that, got my certificate for teaching. We saved up, got the deposit for a house. Dad went outside for a while with Rob, earned some good money there. So we got a deposit for a house, which was over at Priors Road. We moved across there. First time it rained, the rain came in through the window in the front there. So we had to have that seen to. We got double glazing. We'd only had that a week, and we had a settee coming. It was too big to get into the door, so we had to take the window out. Had to have the window taken out to get the settee in. We had one of those big corner ones, you remember. I had to have that in and put the window back again. And we had a porch built on there. So we were there for 5 years. And Dad said, he didn't want to be going up Scaffolding when he was older. So we started looking for the bungalow. And that's how we moved here. We've been here, 30 odd years. Don't know if there's really anything else I can tell you, unless there's anything you want to know about any particular years. The dairy, it was part of the dairy, which has now been made into a village hall or something by the look of it. With the girl from the dairy, I was mad on high jump. I liked that. And we made ourselves a high jump. 2 wooden poles, nails in it, and a bamboo across. And I went to jump and I slipped on the grass. And of course, I've still got the scar there. The nails ripped through my neck there. It didn't look too bad because it's all fat just there, but I had to have stitches in it. So, yeah.
Don't bother me.
I don't even know if the track's still there, if the houses are still there.
Not a clue.
You can't drive up there, then it's just a walk up to Websley, is it?
Yeah, the road is well, it was rough when we were, so I wouldn't think so, because I don't know. You can drive to it another way round, but as I say, I don't know if there's anything there or not.
I'm not creative enough.
What's that?
Creative thinkers are welcome.
Oh, right.
You're also kind of out of the age range as well, 3 to 13. So I
I
know.
know 330.
I know.
I don't know if it's private now or if you can go up there or not.
What, you could go up to Websley that way, can you?
Up here, yeah.
Yeah.
That's just where I used
That's where you
to
used to go.
walk.
Would you guys want to try it, or
It's just
are you happy to
some
walk to
point
Websley,
in
or
the east.
It's probably all.
is it how far is it?
A mile.
About a mile.
About a
A mile.
mile.
It's about 20 minutes, isn't it?
Mm. I caught the school bus. It used to come from Bryanston, pick me up here, take me into Blandford at night, bring me back and drop me, and then I'd have to walk all the way up to Websley to walk home. Of course, when we got our milk from the dairy with the churn, it used to come from the cow.
And this was the dairy.
Yeah, this is the house, and the dairy's behind, or was behind, and the milk came from the machines, from the cow, into the dairy, through the cooler, into a churn, and then we used to measure it out of the churn into our milk cans.
Wow.
And take.
And you had to
take
carry that. So presumably,
But they're
did you do
quite
that
different.
when you came back on your school bus, or?
No, Mum used to do it in the week
Okay.
during the day, and then I used to come down in the morning on the
the
Saturday
weekend.
and Sunday. Yeah.
Wow.
Right. When I first got my first cycle, which I had one Christmas, I thought I'd ride down to the village. So I rode the other way down back to Traveller's Rest and down the road and down that hill, and it's quite a hill. And I landed up in the hedge on the other side of the road.
Oh no.
Dorksy books and so on. And that's where we lived next door, number 33.
You lived in
Got another
there?
new
Yeah.
roof on.
Oh wow.
It wasn't that colour then.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
Got a new roof on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's where the boys, when they were kids, they were up in the bedroom, the furthest one down there, sitting on the windowsill, pulling the thatch out. And it had just been rethatched.
Oh dear. They're in trouble.
What's happening? Is that the shop just there?
Yeah.
So was this the shop that you went into and you were
No,
recognised?
down the bottom.
No, down the bottom.
Just across.
Oh,
was
just
the
tell
other
Andy
shop.
what you told me.
I went down. One of the first times I came out to the village, I went down to the shop on the, I think it was a
On the
Sunday
corner
morning,
down there.
on the main road, crossed over, walked in, said that the newspaper, she said, "Is that up there?" But I said, "No." Oh, she said, "You're the new boyfriend, are you, of Margaret's?"
Everybody knew everybody.
Everybody knew everybody. That's the first time I'd been in the shop.
No, this is true. Down now, yeah. Just come across the road a bit.
This is a listed building. because
I would imagine it
it's
is.
about 1700.
Is it?
Yeah, it's
Beautiful.
built.
You
And
have to duck down because you have to put your head on the ceiling.
Ah. Yeah, it's a beautiful building.
It's one of those spiral staircases.
yeah,
It's
narrow
there,
and yeah.
like that as
So,
you walk round.
Oh.
As you walk
I mean, that was never there.
So it's extended.
That was there.
extension,
Yeah. It was only a little cottage.
But that wall there looks like it's original. Just the stony bit.
Yeah, but there was a wall there, the garden wall, because the garden was out the
Right,
back.
okay.
I mean, the bathroom wasn't part of the house, it was another room out the back and the larder.
Oh.
Yeah,
Pictures of the kids in the garden, weren't they?
yeah, yeah.
Oh.